What's going on, internet? IG here again today. Today I'm going to be looking at Google's flagship for 2013, the Nexus 5. So I've got to say that this device has been highly anticipated since the release of the Nexus 4, to be honest, because the Nexus 4 really introduced a new category of smartphone that Google was trying to achieve a race to the bottom. They were trying to build and prove a smartphone of $400 could be just as good as a phone of $700 or $800. And they had many successes. The phone sold like mad, and overall it delivered a very nice Google experience that has actually kept up to speed pretty well with what Google has been trying to achieve recently. Now then, the Nexus 5 has come along with updated specs, updated hardware, and an overall more premium phone, but still at the same $350 or $400 price tag. Now, inevitably, this phone is going to be compared with $700 or $800 phones like the HTC One, the iPhone 5S, even the iPhone 5C, and all of those other phones. But you do need to remember that with everything in this review, I'm looking at it from the point of view that it only costs $400 in Australia, or $350 in the States and most other places. Stupid Australia tax. Now I'm going to be having a look at Google's latest flagship from two perspectives, strengths and weaknesses, both on the hardware side and on the software side. So first up, let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses in the hardware. Well, the strengths of this device is that it is very lightweight and it's got a very clean design. The lines are very clean and it fits very well in the palm of your hand, and it has a nice overall balanced, lightweight feel to it. It'll also slip very easily in and out of your pocket without much resistance there at all, and that soft touch plastic on the back gives it a nice form of grip, especially compared to some of the cheaper feeling plasticky devices like the Galaxy S4 that have that slippery, slimy plastic cover that gets really bad when your hand gets sweaty. The button placement is also very logical, as you've got the thumb, if you're right-handed, on the power button, and your pointer and middle finger on the volume rocker. If you're left-handed, then this opposite can be said. Headphone jack at the top, USB charging port at the bottom. So overall, it's pretty stock standard for a phone, especially if you're coming from an iPhone. It makes total sense. Another big strength of this device is the screen. At this price point, and really any other price point, you'll be hard pressed to find a better screen on a phone. It is 5 inches, or slightly thereunder, and it's 1920 by 1080p resolution. This means it's going to be crazy sharp, and the pixels per inch is pretty dang good. It's definitely one of the sharpest, most vibrant displays that I've ever seen, and the colors aren't quite as oversaturated as what they are on the AMOLED displays like the Galaxy S4 and the Note 3. Now, the contrast can be a little bit washed out sometimes, especially if you're outdoors and the backlight of the LCD display is starting to kick in. But in regular lighting situations, this display is fantastic to look at, whether it's just the apps, text, videos, photos, you name it, the display really pops. And it's easily the biggest asset of this phone. Okay, so let's talk about the weaknesses. First up, you've got the speaker grill. I'm going to just flat out say it, the speaker is not amazing at all. Obviously Google did need to make some cuts to the quality of this phone, as it is a $350 phone, and consequently the speaker grill was one of those things that got hit, along with the camera and also I feel like the overall phone reception, but I'm going to talk about that in a bit. So the speaker grill on the phone is only a mono speaker located at the bottom right hand side of the phone. Now if you cover your finger over the speaker grill, then it mutes all the sound pretty much altogether, and it all of a sudden goes very internal and you can't really hear anything. This can be a bit of a problem, as I found myself doing this a number of times over the last couple of days. Now, it's not that the speaker is unintelligible or ridiculously tinny, it's just that it's not very powerful and it's not very clear either. It'll get by for things like speakerphone and playing the odd track here or there, but don't expect it to be a real crowd pleaser when it comes to playing tracks in your group of friends. And don't expect it to be able to compete with a lot of ambience in an airport or something if you're trying to watch a video. Okay, so next up, one of the weaknesses that I found, at least compared to my daily driver phone for the last couple of months, which has been the Sony Xperia Z, was call reception and data speeds. Now, the reception of the phone indoors seemed to be a little bit sketchy compared to the performance from the Sony Xperia Z. Now, this could be very much a local issue, but I feel like smartphones should be fairly level across the board, especially if they're unlocked and they support the same bands as each other. Now, unfortunately, the Nexus 5 just didn't seem to have the same strength in reception or data speeds that the Sony Xperia Z did. Now, outdoors, I didn't really notice any problems. It doesn't seem to have as strong as an antenna as what the Sony Xperia Z does. That's just my experience, but your results may vary. Now next up, this weakness isn't exactly a weakness if you consider the price point, but again it's worth mentioning because it is going to be compared to more expensive phones out there, and that would of course be the camera. Now the camera is an 8 megapixel 2.4 aperture optical image stabilization shooter. It means you get some very nice photos indoors and outdoors under decent lighting conditions, and you actually get some very nice low light photos as well due to that optical image stabilization. However, the photos aren't really that amazing, they're kind of average. To be honest, that's not really a problem in a phone like the Nexus, where its prime goal is not to be a fantastic camera phone. It's designed to be a great Google experience, and they deliver on that point very well. But it is a weakness when you consider the other flagship phones that are coming out this year especially. The camera, even on the likes of the Sony Xperia Z, which came out at the beginning of the year, the colors are more vibrant. Obviously the sharpness is there because of the megapixel count, and also the lower aperture means you can get better, crisper, more focused shots. Now the Nexus 5 shots aren't horrible, but they're just sort of average. The color reproduction is okay, and the autofocus seems to work quite well. It's just that overall it doesn't seem to be performing as well as what the more expensive phones are, and that can be expected. One thing I will note though is that the video camera is actually pretty decent. So as you can see, the video quality is not too shabby at all, especially the quality of that microphone. It actually produces some pretty workable results, and with the combination of the optical image stabilization, it actually gives very smooth and high quality video for a smartphone device. And it also isn't too bad for a vloggity device, even though it doesn't have any stabilization on the front camera. The mic quality is still pretty decent. Of course, if you were to use the camera on the back of the phone, that's chilly, then it actually turns out to be a very decent vloggity camera simply because, well, that image stabilization is pretty helpful. Now the final weakness on the hardware side of things is battery life. Battery life is really all over the place. I can sometimes get through a whole day, and other times it's gone just after lunch. It really depends what you're doing, and I also think that there could be some software sketchiness happening here. So hopefully a software update from Google in the future will iron that weirdness out. One can only hope, because the battery life is a little bit disappointing considering it has about the same size battery as what the Sony Xperia Z does, and I'm not really seeing the same sort of battery life that I'm getting on that, considering that the display and the software is theoretically chewing through more power on the Sony Xperia Z than on the KitKat enhanced Nexus 5. Okay, so mentioning KitKat, let's move on to software really quick. KitKat is a fantastic improvement on Android. Easily the best thing about the Nexus 5 is the fantastic Google experience of Android that it delivers. Android version 4.4 KitKat comes with a great list of features and improvements that really deliver not only on the high-end devices but also on the low-end devices. They've lowered the system requirements for Android 4.4, which means that we're going to be able to see a lot of the new features and improvements of KitKat on lower-end devices. Now, of course, the Nexus 5 has a Snapdragon 800 Pro chip with 2 GB of RAM, so it's of course no slouch in the performance department, and KitKat really flies on it. Apps and multitasking galore is not a problem. You can really fly through however many apps you want and it will still chug along happily. And of course, gaming performance is also top-notch due to those Adreno graphics that are paired with the Snapdragon processor. Now, the other thing that I really like about KitKat is the fact that the apps and the overall smartphone experience look like they belong finally on a 1080p screen. Things look a little bit small and cramped before, but due to the new fonts and the bigger icons and the more app-centric focus of Android, it looks like apps finally belong on this high-definition display. The interface is also more simplified now with less colors, less crazy options, and more content. They also have included some nice little simplified visual cues that help new users to kind of pick up and learn Android very easily. Really, this is what you can expect out of a Nexus device, as it is Google's own experience tailored to Google's own hardware. You can see where I'm going with the similarities here. Also, one of the new features in KitKat is the location awareness. Now, when it comes to Google Now, the service that tries to present you with information that you might need before you actually go looking for it, such as your weather, your travel times, local movie times if you're close to a theater, postage details on a package that you may have ordered, etc. It's a simple swipe to the left now from the home screen, and that will present you with the cards of all the information that you need. It's also become a lot more accurate with location awareness. Now, of course, this is something that you can opt into or opt out of. It's not automatically turned on, but of course it is convenient when it gives you a more accurate location reading for things like travel time to work or travel time back home again. It's also expected that the performance of this device will hold up in the years to come, as trim support was enabled in Android 4.3, meaning that essentially the storage is much more efficient and it will continue to run happily and quickly years down the track, even if you're adding and deleting content and apps all the time. Okay, so now let's quickly talk about the weaknesses and the shortcomings of the software. First of all, the camera app, again, tied to the poor camera quality and on the hardware side of things. The software, I think, is where the main weaknesses are to be found. The camera app is quite slow compared to the other flagship phones, which are almost instantaneous with their picture taking. So the camera app could do with a lot of improvement. Also, I'm not the hugest fan of the Google Hangouts app, which has replaced the messaging app for both SMSs and instant messaging on, Google Hangouts. The two are kind of combined, but then at the same time they're split, so that even if you have one person with their phone number and then their Google Hangouts tag, you get to choose between those to see which one you would rather contact them on. Now, obviously Google are trying to push the use of Hangouts in people's everyday communication, but then again, it's kind of disjointed from the fact that you've still got that SMS tag there, so if you've been having an SMS conversation, you can't really carry it over into a Google Hangouts conversation. So the integration is still a little bit messy. And also they have emoticon support, but they like picture messages, which means that you get charged more, and then the real or the more traditional emoticons don't actually translate into little pictures, so it's all a little bit weird. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but that's just me. There's also other little quirks in KitKat, like having 2 photo apps. I'm not really sure what that's about. And also not really having a streaming video app on your device enabled by default. The gallery doesn't seem to handle streaming video. But the rest of the apps on the Google experience fly, and they look very well designed. And that's what you'd come to expect on any Nexus phone, and it's certainly true with the Nexus 5. So at the end of the day, this device is an easy buy for the Android enthusiast. You've probably already got one if you wanted to get one by now. But I'd also recommend picking it up if you're an average consumer looking for a decent quality device that will give you a very smooth phone experience, but you don't want to pay an arm and a leg for a $700 or $800 device off contract. Now, of course, it depends what you want and what you like in a smartphone, but at the end of the day, Google and LG really don't cut any corners that are going to severely cripple the performance of the Nexus train. It's a quality device with quality software, giving an overall premium feel at an otherwise pretty budget price. So it's highly recommended, and with the updates that Google will provide on a frequent basis, then the software integration with the hardware is only going to get better, which will hopefully see improvements to the battery life and also to the camera. Once those two areas are relatively addressed, then this device is definitely a killer device for $350, $400. So that's my review of the Nexus 5. Click the like button down below if it helped you out, and feel free to subscribe if you like this content on a regular basis. I'll be back in the very near future looking at the Ubuntu GNOME edition, as well as some other exciting little reviews coming in the very near future. Thank you all for watching. Peace out, ladies and gentlemen.